Thanks, and thank you all for being here this early in the morning. I'm a morning person also, so it wasn't too hard for me to get up. And also it was a great opportunity to come and share with you my thoughts about some of the issues in urban communities or at-risk communities and the need for leadership development in those communities. What you'll also find out today too is what a significant role I feel the business community plays in that process. As you stated, after I retired from the NBA, I started my own company. Went through all the challenges of startup and swore up and down I'd never do another startup again in my life. About 2 years ago, I was making a transition, took a little sabbatical, and for a long time, I'd always felt that I had a calling to serve youth, but had never acted upon it. During my NBA career, you're busy, you're going, and it just didn't seem like there was this time. You can do a little token stuff, give money here and there, but never really engaged in the process. After I retired, you're running your own business. The realization of the awesome responsibility that I had as a dad to my own kids and to my wife, and trying to figure out, how do I go out and serve youth? It seemed like it was a very, very difficult task. But a couple years ago, I found myself where I only had 2 kids left at home, and within the next 2 years, then those 2 kids would be out. And so I felt real strongly that that calling to reach out and serve youth, now was the time to pursue that. And so myself and another gentleman, Eric Knox, who also played at Oregon State and who's a pastor over in Northeast Portland, we got together and started talking about the issues in the urban communities and what were the solutions. What we determined was that basically that there was failed leadership in the community. And the evidence of the failed leadership is just when you go and you look at all the problems you see in the urban communities, you look at the low education rate, drugs, crimes, all the things you read about in the papers, those things are not getting better. When you look at all the money that's being poured into programs and services to address those needs, but yet the problem just persists and keeps getting worse. So we said, that to us says that the leaders in this community are failing, and that there needed to be a change. But we recognized that change was going to be very difficult, and that it was going to have to be a long-term process, a very long-term process. And we knew also that it was going to have to start with the youth. People sometimes they give lip service to youth being our future, but when it comes down to really laying the foundation that allow these kids to be successful, not only be successful, but to have an impact on the community, we fall way short. And so when we decided, we did a survey of the different programs and things that are in the community, exist in the community, because like I say, I wanted to plug into something. I didn't want to start from scratch. I did not want to build an organization from scratch. I wanted to plug into an existing organization. And after surveying the organizations and things that were going on in the community, the conclusion that we came away with was that there wasn't anything out there that was really going to effectively address the issue. Eric, before he started his own church, he had been a youth pastor, and he had started an organization called Urban Progress. It was a youth ministry, and it just started with him just going around and picking up kids and going and playing basketball with them, and then afterwards having a talk with them. And then from that beginning, the organization grew until they were serving over 600 kids, through their after-school program. And the significant thing about his program also was that when he planted his own church in the community, a lot of the leaders in his church were products of Urban Progress. And these were young men and women who had come up through his program, who had gone to college, who were now in the community, working in the community. And it was proof to me that the plan and direction that he had set was working, and that we wanted to take that to another level so that we could have a greater impact in the community. So when we decided to start urban sports, we knew that we wanted to work with, we wanted to develop leaders. You know, our vision when we started the organization was that we would raise up a new generation of leaders in urban communities that would be effectively equipped to deal with urban issues. That was our vision. And then our mission was to provide the relevant resources and the mentoring relationship that will allow these young people to develop and deploy their gifts in the community. And as we looked at it, we said, okay, what were some of the critical factors in developing leaders, in developing these young kids? The most important thing that we saw was the development of long-term relationships. That so often in at-risk communities, you had programs that were set up that were short-term. People would come in, they'd give their money, they would come in and they would mentor a kid for an hour here or time there, you know, and then they would move on. You know, it was these short-term relationships when a lot of the kids that you were talking about in the community, a lot of the quote-unquote at-risk kids in the community, what was missing in their life were vital relationships. Because a lot of these kids did come from single-parent homes. So you're talking about working with kids who had this absence of some breakdown in vital relationships in their life. So this short-term thing was not going to work. If you were going to make a commitment to these kids, to develop them, it had to be long-term. The second thing was that if you're going to develop leaders, if you're going to develop these kids this leadership, that they had to have a servant's heart. They had to have a true heart to serve their community and to serve others. And then the third thing was we felt that they had to have a strong spiritual base that guided their decisions and guided their values. And as leaders, the thing that they would pass on as leaders, that their strong spiritual base would be that guiding factor. And so the model that we started, we took the model of Urban Progress and another organization over in Northeast Portland called Friends of the Children. And Friends of the Children was started by a local businessman, Duncan Campbell, who grew up in Northeast Portland and had a real heart for youth. And the Friends of the Children model was long-term mentoring. And they start with the kids starting in first grade at targeted schools that were the quote-unquote most high-risk kids, extremely high-risk kids. And they made a commitment to those kids that they would be with those kids from first grade through college. And that those kids each would have a mentor. And so they had paid mentors. That was their full-time job, was to mentor 8 kids. So we took those two models of Urban Progress and Friends of the Children, and we put those together and we came up with urban sports. Now, the reason we chose sports was because in urban communities, the two areas that you're going to connect with these kids most readily is music and sports. Those are the two areas that you can start connecting with these kids to build a relationship. So we chose our shared passion of basketball to connect with these kids, because we also knew the dynamics of a team. What happens in a team environment when you have a shared passion, shared goals, how that pulls that group together. And pulling that group together, now you start to form the support base that would be needed. So we use sports as the vehicle. So when we went out, our goal was that we were going to start with the kids in the 6th grade, and we were going to start with 4 teams, 2 boys and 2 girls teams. The other piece, the foundation was education. You know, because without education, you really don't have a chance. I mean, you've set people up, they set themselves up for failure if they don't have an education. And so we said the priority was going to be the relationships that we would develop and connect through sports, but then we were going to try the education to make sure that all the kids in the program had this proper education. We went out and we targeted a specific area over in Northeast Portland. We targeted the Jefferson Grant feeder pattern for the kids that we went after. We met with the principals of all the middle schools that fed with the elementary schools that fed the middle schools, and went and met with the principals and said, you know, we're looking for kids that you feel have leadership potential and love sports. That was the initial criteria that we were looking at. Then what we did was we gave them what we call our initial scattering report to fill out on each one of the kids that they identified. And in that initial scattering report, there were 9 barriers to success that we had identified that we wanted them to rate each one of these kids that they identified as potential leaders. And the 9 barriers to success were academic deficiencies, low grades, low tests, single parent home, behavior problems in school, problem with authority, single family home, and little or no family support. There were 9 barriers that we were looking at. Our goal was that we weren't necessarily going out trying to look for a big pool of at-risk youth to work with, because we knew that within a team dynamic, that within a team you had leaders. You had individuals that you were going to do developing, role players, the people that you were developing further, and then you're going to have the ones that you really, really needed to focus on. And so our goal was not to go out and get, 40 at-risk kids. Our goal was to take a look at the kids that we identified, and out of that group, we were looking for 30% of the kids to fall into the category with 0 or no barriers at all. 40% would have 2 to 4 barriers, and then 30% would have 5 or more barriers. That was our goal. So when we started out, we had 2 constituents. We had the young kids that we were going to be working with. Our second constituent were going to be our mentors. Friends of the Children use young men and women who are through college, were out in the community, and they paid them to work with these kids. In our model, we were going after college students as our mentors, because in our model, what we were looking to do is we're looking to connect generations. Because this is a generational thing, we're looking to connect generations. We're looking for young college students who fit our criteria. First of all, you have the education piece. Well, if they're in college, so they're on track in terms of the education piece. 2, they had to have a servant's heart, and have already demonstrated it by being involved with some type of youth outreach already, preferably urban youth, because urban kids are special, okay? And it takes a special hand to deal with urban kids, because there are needs, but they will run over you, okay? So we were looking for kids who had already been involved with some of the youth outreach, but also urban youth. And then the third, they had that strong spiritual base. So those are the 3 things that we were looking for. So when we started out, and you start learning lessons real quick. You can have these great plans, but then when you get out there, you start learning what the real landscape was like. One of the first things that we learned was that our goal of working with 40 kids the first year was not realistic. We figured out quickly you had to have prior relationships with enough kids, a pool of kids, in order to end up with a pool of 40. And we didn't have that. So we started out with 25 kids. Started with 25 kids, and we started out with 2 mentors. And we had a boys and a girls team. As we got into the program, we knew that we were in a race against time with these kids, in that in terms of basketball, we're a new organization. Okay, even though we have some name recognition because of myself and Eric, still there are basketball organizations that are out there in the community already that all the kids want to play for. And so we knew we were in a race against time to get to the point where the basketball meant enough to the kids, or our relationship with them meant enough that they would stick when we started disciplining. And we started losing that battle early. And it was about the halfway point of our season, because our kids, when they played in local park and rec leagues, is by the halfway point in the season when I kind of had enough. I had some epiphanies, and I had enough, because what I started to see was that even though our program, like a lot of other programs, was well-meaning, there was a fatal flaw in our program. There's a fatal flaw in the approach that a lot of programs take in serving at-risk community, in that if your program did not have a curb attached to it, it was doomed to failure or mediocrity. Now, when I say it needed a curb attached to it, what I mean by that, at some point, the people that you are helping, at some point, they have got to start giving back. And if they don't, you got to kick them to the curb. And you ask the next kid on the curb, come off the curb now, you can come on in and we'll work with you. Because what we were finding was that there's outside forces pulling with these kids, because the way the funding community had things set up, funding community wants you to work with at-risk youth. They want to know how many kids you're working with. So people started shaping their programs around numbers. You know, there wasn't really any high expectations placed on, because if you place high expectations on these kids, they would walk. They jump to the next program. And so we looked at that, and I'm looking at our college mentors. And remember I said that breakdown we were looking for? Well, we ended up with too many 5 or more barrier kids that were unloaded on our college mentors. And the level of ungratefulness on the part of these kids and their parents was flat out astounding. And at that point, I looked, our organization, we looked at what we were doing, and the conclusion we came to was like, look, I am not going to be held hostage to some bad kids. Okay? There are some good kids, there are good kids out there, but we're not going to be held hostage because we're not developing leaders. If we're sitting here trying to work with kids and get them to appreciate what you're doing, that's not going to work. And so one of the things we started doing, we were in talks with merging another organization into ours. There's a Friday morning group that I meet with every Friday morning, 7 o'clock. And one of the gentlemen in that group had a basketball organization that was well known in the community. And we started talking about merging the two together because I knew if we did, one thing we were going to get, we were going to get a brand name that would be a draw. That could be that hammer we can start using on kids that, look, you don't shape up, get out, because we got someone else that wants to come in. And so we started talking about how we can merge these organizations together, merge theirs into ours. And we were far enough along that I sat down with our kids after the last game of the first half of the season, and I just flat out told them, I said, second half of the season is going to be totally different. I said, I'm not putting up with no more of your ungratefulness. I said, I'm not putting up with no more of your attitude. I said, we started this program not because of basketball, because we started this program because your teachers believed in you and we believe in you. And if you don't want to take advantage of the opportunity that's presented to you, if you don't appreciate what these college kids are giving back and doing, then you are gone. And I don't care if this program drops down to 2 kids, we're willing to go that route. We told them we're going to merge another organization in. I said, based on basketball talent, they only want 2 of you, okay? So wake up. From that point on, things changed with that group of kids. Because we had put in enough time. Because not only did we have the basketball and the study hall, but we had, we'd go and do the pizza thing. We have sleepovers. And oh my God, it's kind of a tradition. But I got to stick to it. I just went through another one. They get to sleep. This time they got to sleep at 3 a.m. instead of 5 a.m., okay? But those type of things are what's needed to build the relationships with these kids so you can start making these changes. The second thing that came out of that was, I said, you know what? I am not going to be held hostage to this notion of having to work with at-risk youth. Yes, you have to work with at-risk youth, but you're spending a disproportionate amount of money and resource on at-risk youth. There are kids in the community who are, quote unquote, not at risk, who are invaluable assets to the community, but they get overlooked because everybody wants to put the resources over here. And so we made a shift and said, we're focused on these young kids, but where our real focus needs to be is on our college mentors. Our college mentors and our high school interns that will be developing to become future mentors. Because those are kids that you can handpick, that are high achieving, have a heart for their community, have that strong spiritual. But we can handpick those kids. And part of their development would be to work with this pool of at-risk youth. And then in time, if the kids who are in our basketball program, our sports program, if they stick long enough, the cream will naturally rise to the top. And out of that group of kids will become our future kids, college kids that we'll work with. So we said, we need to focus on our college kids more and the resources to develop them. And when we started thinking like that, some other things all of a sudden opened up in our mind. And it's like, now wait a minute. We got these great college kids that we're working with, getting their education, they're excelling there, they're serving their community, there's this strong spiritual base, But you know what? When they graduate from college, unless there's jobs for them in the community that they're working in, we're going to lose them. They're going to end up going somewhere else and benefiting somebody else's community. One of the fatal flaws in trying to serve at-risk community is that a lot of the solutions that are put to bear at-risk solutions come from what's called a needs map. There's a needs map that when you look at it, you identify all the needs in the community. You say, okay, you've got these single parent homes, you've got drugs, you've got low achieving academics, you got all these things in the community, and they say, okay, let's go meet this need. Let's bring resources to meet these needs. That's been the typical approach to serving an at-risk community. The opposite of a needs map is an asset map. An asset map says that no matter how far down a community is, there are still assets in that community. And you must identify what those assets are and build on those. Build on those that will then eventually address the needs. Because when you focus on the needs map, what you end up doing is you end up creating what I call a private welfare system. Because United Way, all these different agencies that are out serving the community, at-risk community, once again, you're giving money, you're giving resources to people, but where's the accountability? Where is it that the people that you're helping, where is it that they then start giving back? Where is this money being directed to those high-achieving youth and kids in the community who are, when you look at that asset map, they're one of those assets. One of the unique things about Portland, in particular the African American community, when you talk about the African American community, the first thing that comes to mind, people's mind, is Northeast Portland. Northeast Portland. Now, I don't know how many of you have been over Northeast Portland lately, but the reality is that there is no African American community anymore in Portland. It has disintegrated. Northeast Portland has revived. Okay? Gentrification has gone on there. And gentrification is actually good. The question is how do you make it fair? You look at that community where there used to be a strong African American influence in terms of neighborhood communities, stores, businesses. It's gone. If you go over there now, it's gone. The community has been revitalized. And part of that is because we've been focusing all these resources over there on all these needs, these high risk factors, and the high achieving, successful young men and women have left. They've left the community. The leaders have left. And what's been replaced is property values go down, until finally someone outside the community says, whoa, there's some real jewels over there. And then they get their network together and they start coming up with this master plan to revitalize the community. Now the people that were involved, that live in the community, they don't participate in that. Why? Once again, it goes back to failed leadership. The leadership did not recognize years ago what was going on and started focusing on how do we come up with first our own plan to help ourselves so that we can participate in this revival. What we're doing with urban sports is to start that process. And to make that happen, like I said, it's a generational thing. It's going to take generations. We also decided that 6th grade was not soon enough. You got to go down to 4th grade. So we have teams through 4th through 8th grade, but really focusing more on our 4th and 5th grade teams, because those are the teams, the youngest kids, the youngest parents, that gives us time to build the longest relationships with. Our college students and our high school interns that we're drawing from Jefferson and Grant. They're the ones that are working with these younger kids. The big need that we have to identify now is the business community that'll come alongside these college students and the high school intern to start mentoring them, to start developing their network so that when they graduate from college, there's opportunities for them in the community that will allow them to stay. Over these past 2 years, I've been totally, blessed with both the experiences, the trials, and the challenges of what we've gone through with urban sports. But that's been a tremendous learning experience. I've also had the opportunity to participate in this initiative. It's called the DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative, which was started by the DeVos family. Some of you might know the DeVos family. They're the ones that started Amway. Okay. Yeah, you laugh at Amway. You say, "Oh, Amway," but them folks, they got loot. Okay. But this is a family that a few years back, the father wanted something that all of his kids could do together. They all had their separate foundations that they were working, that they directed, but the father wanted something that they could all do together. And they did their research, focus groups like they do. I mean, they use all business world principles, okay? But what they ended up coming up with was what they wanted to do collectively was to work with individuals who work with youth in urban communities. That's where their focus was. I was selected as one of the 10 leaders from Portland that made it the Portland team. And we're just completing a 15-month program that they took us through. And through that program, they took us through personal assessments, assessments of our organization, system thinking, community building. I mean, we're talking the whole gamut that you wouldn't normally get in quote-unquote nonprofit. And what I've learned, the stuff like the asset map, community building, I learned a lot of that stuff through DeVos. But probably the most impactful experience that I had over the last 2 years was I had an opportunity to go to Africa last August. Prior to going to Africa, a lot of the issues that are involved with at-risk communities, and particularly with the African American community, I didn't personally relate with. Because for me, I'm like, okay, the stuff with slavery and all that stuff that happened in the past, it's time to move on. I'm a child of God. I'm looking forward. It's time to move on. But my trip to Africa changed that. I was asked to go over there on the request of the president of Benin, small West African country. He was looking for an ex-NBA player to go over and work with his national basketball program and to use that to develop leaders for his country around Christian values. When I heard that, I'm like, that's a big urban sports model, but it's for a nation. And so I had an opportunity to go over there on that trip. And it was a life-changing experience for me on so many levels. I can't even begin to go through all of them tonight. This morning, but the one experience that I want to share with you in closing, because it connects so much to what it is that we're trying to do over in Northeast Portland, but it connects to the key of developing leaders, indigenous leaders in the community. We took a trip. We took a trip and we visited two cities, two villages. The first one was a village called Ouida. And Ouida, a lot of people don't realize, Ouida was one of the primary exit points for the slave trade. And they took us through the whole process of the slave trade. And it was painful. It was a very sad and painful day because, me as an African American had to come to grips with the fact of our role, the African chief, the African people, our role in the slave trade. And it was very evident, our role in that slave trade. And we had to come to grips with that. And it was a very, very sad day. The president of Benin, he had gone before the nations of Africa about 5 years ago and had apologized to the nation of Africa for Benin's role in the slave trade and said that we must reconcile amongst ourselves first. No, don't forget, don't sit there and worry about how much the Europeans and the Americans played in the role. We got to reconcile ourselves first. And then we must reach out to the diaspora, those that are dispersed, and reconcile with them first. That's got to be the key. So that was, that's part of this whole thing, this program that we're working. And so that day was a very sad day for me, very emotional and sad day. The next day was a totally uplifting day because we were taken to a village. And this village 5 years ago was filthy. They were fighting with each other. because you had factions in the village that were descendants of the African chiefs that sold them into slavery, and you had a faction that were descendants of the slaves. They were fighting with each other, dirty. Of course, there's no education, just an African village that was steeped in poverty. One of the guys who was one of our guides, Romain, when we were over there, who was also a pastor, he had taken a group in there 5 years ago with this message of reconciliation to this village. And when we went over there, we went to the village, they almost got stoned. People said, we don't want to hear this. We don't hear this. And he left, but he didn't give up. He came back, but this time he came back with 5 African Americans with him. And the message that they brought was, look, if anyone has a right to be angry, it's us, because you sold our forefathers into slavery. But if we can forgive you, you should be able to forgive each other. And that started this reconciliation process in that village. That reconciliation process then led on to when we were there. Here's this village now. 5 years later, the village is totally clean, has its own school, it has fresh water wells. They went in, they set up a micro bank. When they went with this micro bank, they went in, they looked at the village, and they decided, they did their asset map. And they determined that one of the vital assets of the community were the women of the community. Because of culture, the men in the village, they had too many wives, they were lazy, undependable. Some of the same things that we're dealing with our community over here. The women were more dependable, and so they looked at the women and said, okay, what is their daily activity that they go and do to create money, food, whatever it is, to help their families to survive? Basically, what is their business? And based upon that and their capacity, they gave them training, and then set up lines of credit for them to help grow their little business that they had to pay back with interest, low interest, but they had to pay back. Okay? So I'm looking at, and I left that village with pride and just excitement, because I can see the similarities to the approach that we've taken over here in America in addressing the problems in the community, and what they're doing over there in the motherland. That this village, Ouida, and this other village, Ouida, the other significance of Ouida, which is still filthy and dirty, was also the birthplace of voodoo. So I look at this village here, birthplace of voodoo, still mired in poverty and sickness. This other village, 5 years, starting with reconciliation, has now got their own thriving economy. And oh, by the way, the whole village is saved. They're all believers. And I looked at that and said, you know what? We've been sending missionaries to Africa for years. And what do we have to show for it? What do we have to show for it? But just in a short period of time, when the people of that village and that community said, we're going to make a difference ourselves. And the exciting thing was that it was the Americans, the African Americans from our country, was the catalyst to help make that it reinvigorated me to come back and take on the challenges that we have here. Closing. The key to developing leaders. And I say, look at your definition of leader. I had to look at my definition of a leader. My definition ended up being individuals who had the capacity to affect positive change and use that to do so. So that doesn't pigeonhole people into someone stand up in front of a group or leading this group. No, it's people that have the capacity to affect positive change in their community. That takes education. Just like I'm sure all of you are working hard to make sure that your kids get the best education possible. In at-risk community, they need that also. Sadly, a lot of them don't have parents like you. So these future leaders, they need the education. They have to have that servant's heart. They have to have that servant's heart. They have to have that strong spiritual base. But then they need people. They need mentors. They need people in the community willing to come alongside of them and mentor them to help meet their needs, Help meet their needs, not as on a need basis, but help meet the needs of a friend. That involves developing relationships, and relationships around something greater than ourselves. It's actually not a very difficult model to understand and grasp. It's the commitment that it takes in order to see that through. And it takes relationship. We have a group, like I said, we meet every Friday morning at 7 o'clock. This group's been meeting for over close to 10 years. I joined the group about a year and a half ago. The group is half black and half white, and it was started around racial reconciliation and accountability. And we meet every Friday morning, 7 o'clock, and when we meet, there's absolutely no agenda. Zero. We just show up. And when you show up, you show others that you care. And when you show up, what comes out of that is we deal with some pretty heavy issues, both on a personal level and on a community level. And I can say, honestly, it is my feeling that the issues that are going on in Northeast Portland right now, I have no hope. This is not from arrogant standpoint. If our group doesn't make the difference, I have no hope for that community. Because the thing about our group is that the reason we're together is we're committed to each other. We have formed a covenant relationship with each other. And there's some powerful guys in our group, businessmen in our group. And we have leaders from the black community in our group, the police force, the community, that we come together because, one, we're all believers, we're committed to each other, and committed to a covenant relationship, and committed to showing up. And we're committed to expanding that group around that simple principle. First, show up, just show up, continue to show up, to make ourselves available to change the community. And that's what it takes to change a community. And that is true leadership. Do we have any question and answer period? Or?
How do you get the mentors of the college?
Well, the first year was easy because I knew that within Eric's church there were leaders, and actually one of those was my daughter. And part of our model, we have a paid mentoring model also, because you're talking about a college student. We're asking them to commit 20 hours a week between practices, study hall, and spending one-on-one time with the kids. My daughter was working at a coffee shop, and we're saying, well, instead of working at the coffee shop 5 hours a day, you're going to work with these kids. So we look to local churches, obviously the colleges, but a lot of that comes through our network and networking with people in the community to identify the kids. The kids then we're adding our high school interns. We work with the head counselor at Jefferson and Grant to identify the high achieving kids in that school. So I met with the Honor Society at both schools, and we're looking for the really high achieving kids in those schools for our interns.
When you talked about discipline a little bit, taking people out of the program, taking kids out of the program, and saying that's it, you're cut off. I imagine there was an escalation before you did that. Talk about that a little bit.
There is an escalation, and believe me, that is a big challenge. I'll give you a perfect example. We went through a stretch where there's a lot of fighting on our team. Fighting between the boys and the girls fighting each other during a game. And then we had an incident where some of our boys said some very lewd things to our girls and some gestures, and we suspended those boys. Also knowing that there's probably had been some escalating on the girls' side too, but what they did was just flat out wrong. We suspended them, met with their parents, sat down with the boys, talked to them, explained what they were doing, and after a period, we were going to bring them back. We brought them back to the gym just to sit there and watch okay? And after that practice, the girls come until they did it again. And I was just like, how do you keep them in the program long enough to make a difference? And so we went to so I sat down. First I had the mentors handle it the first time. That's part of their development. The mentors handled the intervention with the kids and then with the parents. Second time I stepped in because I'm like, what is going on? And so we went through the process again, and then I made them go apologize to the parents and the girl, and we put them on probation again, and we eventually brought them back. It's very difficult because, like I said, you love these kids and you want to help them, but at some point you got to draw the line, and that's a judgment call. I'm happy to say that like one of the boys who was one of the ringleaders loved the kid. He's in the program, and the biggest shock to me this year is when we got our progress reports for him. This kid's getting A's and B's, and I was floored. So it is very difficult, because like I said, we know what we're dealing with here, and we'll give them an opportunity and chance. But at some point, you got to start kicking in. And when we kick you to the curb, we're not going to totally dismiss you from us. But you've just removed yourself from the opportunity to be around us on a regular basis. But it's up to you to make the changes.